Very exciting. Okay, wonderful. Right, yeah, we are live now. That's fantastic. I really do love this platform because it's got all the little tickers along the bottom. Like it just really, I'm just here to talk, and it's all done for me more or less. So yeah, hopefully over the next sort of, we won't start instantly. We'll sort of hopefully get a few people that start joining and maybe hopefully leave a comment as well. Because yeah, it was kind of, these are obviously real people that will kind of sort of log in and out, and some might not be able to stay for the whole thing, or some might not turn up right when it goes live. So yeah, we'll just sort of wait a little bit, and hopefully people will sort of start logging in. The one thing is, I can't necessarily see how many people are in here unless they put a little message in the chat there, like Virtual Village will have there. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Q&A. So as people do start coming in, I think I'm going to encourage them to sort of leave a little message in the chat, just to say hello. We've got Claire. Hi, Claire. Welcome. Catherine's here. Hi, Catherine. People are going to start coming in. Good morning. So yeah, it's always nice to see who we have and where they're tuning in from. So hopefully we get a couple of people. Got another Claire. It always seems to be lots of Claires. Oh my gosh, another Claire. Bex, hi Bex. Morning everyone. Lisa. Oh, Lisa's coming from the heart of Sherwood Forest. Oh, bless. Lisa's supposed to be driving home from their holidays now, but they've waited around for this. That's such a compliment.
I'm honoured.
Thank you, Lisa. We have Jan and Margaret. Margaret coming from Hereford. Hi, everyone. So Lisa's gone ahead and said where they're tuning in from. So if you want to leave a comment, if you said hello, let us know where you're coming from. Let us know. Oh, tell us what your favorite bird is. We can get the conversation going. For example, my name's Emily. I'm tuning in from the Listening Book Studios here in London. And my favorite birds. Oh, I really wish I hadn't suggested that now, because now I actually have to narrow it down. I'm going to cheat and say my favorite birds are blackbirds, swifts, and magpies. So you can name more than one.
Swifts about to arrive, so
I'm very excited. I'm really looking forward to it. I've already I was actually working in the office here at Listening Books. So Listening Books, we're based in London, near Borough Station, and so it's a very urban area, but there was a lovely blackbird singing near the office yesterday as I worked. It was absolutely beautiful. You know, when things just go a bit quiet and then it just sort of cuts through. Oh, it's lovely. So Claire's saying, one of the Claires is saying robin, favorite bird, another very good choice. Debbie's saying hi from Luton. It's good to see we've got a few people joining now. So as we're joining, to sort of not take up too much time and wait too long. Actually, no, Clara said, coming from High Wycombe, I like pigeons and seagulls. Someone has to stick up for them. I really like that. So as you're all saying good morning, I will just... I mentioned that I work for Listening Books, as you might see from my lovely background. So if for those of you who might not be familiar with us, so at Listening Books, we are an audiobook lending charity for anyone in the UK whose illness, mental health condition, disability or learning difficulty makes it more challenging to read print or hold a physical book. So I believe our details will be signposted to sort of throughout the call by Virtual Village Hall. But please do look us up if you haven't heard of us and you think that we could support you with our audiobook service. So we've got Jan saying hello from Essex. Favorite bird is the skylark. Oh, I think we might have a couple of
I agree with that.
It lifts my spirits as it soars into the sky singing. That's lovely, Jan. Thank you for sharing that with us. We have Lisa saying owls, kestrels, eagles, hummingbirds. Wow. Andy House's amazing hummingbirds. What good choices of birds we have here. Debbie's got a pair of jays in the trees outside in Northampton. Wonderful. That's fantastic. Okay, lovely. So I told you a little bit about listening books, but obviously this is not necessarily why we're here, because here to chat to me today is the person that I have with me on this call, and that's Charlie Corbett. So those of you, some of you might have read his book, 12 Birds to Save Your Life. Others maybe haven't. For those who haven't, 12 Birds to Save Your Life is an autobiographical book that Charlie wrote about how British bird life gave him lessons in happiness in a particularly difficult time for him through the illness and loss of his mum. So it's about bird life, but it's also about mental health and grief and well-being and family. And it's a really fantastic book. I was just gushing to Charlie already about how much I personally loved it. I've been recommending it to everyone I know, including we've also been talking about it in the Listening Books Club, which is our very own book club group on Facebook, which everyone is welcome to join. If you find us on Facebook, it will be linked to on our page, because we're learning about books about nature at the moment. So it ties in absolutely beautifully. So it is a fantastic book, but I don't want to take up too much time gushing about it. I think we've got quite a few people here now. So I'm going to hand over to you, Charlie, to just maybe, do you want to start off by telling us a bit about yourself?
Oh, yeah. So who am I? Gosh, Charlie Corbett, author of 12 Birds to Save Your Life. What am I? Gosh, well, I used to be a journalist. I was a financial journalist for many years. I actually grew up on a farm. Left home, traveled the world, was a financial journalist, and then came back to the UK in my 30s, having been living in Australia and then traveling for work all around Africa, and realized that I'd kind of completely forgotten my upbringing and where I grew, all the birds and everything from when I grew up. And this was now 15, 16 years ago, and set about, I suppose, putting that right. I barely knew the difference between a sparrow and a starling, and I felt rather ashamed of myself, given I'd grown up on a farm. And yeah, as I say, forgotten all I used to know. And it was during this process of reconnecting that my mother got ill and died. And then it was quite what I hadn't really realized was how important our connection to nature is, and how many of us, all of us almost, have sort of dislocated ourselves from that. And these soaring skylarks that people are mentioning and that kind of thing. And it was a skylark that kind of really tuned me back in properly to how important just the sitting and listening to the song of a bird can be. And our ancestors, I think, were better able to cope with grief, with uncertainty, I think, because they were more tuned in to the nature around them, to not just the birds, but the changing of the seasons. We've forgotten this, like this old peeling wallpaper that we have around us that we've long ago forgotten to notice. So that's a bit about me anyway. I probably went a bit too long.
No, not at all. This is what we're here to chat about. So I mentioned your book, 12 Birds to Save Your Life, which I think we'll be coming back to a lot in this session. But for people who maybe haven't read it or listened to it, I listened to the audiobook version, by the way, which is beautifully narrated by Charlie himself and has some wonderful clips of real birdsong in there as well. So it's a lovely piece of audio all in all, and I would recommend it. But for people who maybe haven't read it or listened to it, is there anything else that you would want them to know about it before we kind of get started? Anything I didn't mention or that you'd like to kind of reiterate about your book?
Not really, no. Well, first, I also forgot to mention how it's a great honour to be being interviewed today and to have so many people log in. No, nothing really. It's about, I suppose, making nature relatable. I think we were discussing before the problem with birds, or when you tell people that you are interested in the birds, or just know the birds in your garden, for example, they immediately put you in the sort of Twitcher category. And they sort of back away a little bit and think you're sort of put you in the same bucket as a train spotter or something. I say, no, well, this is madness. This stuff should be innate. Our ancestors knew this, absolutely from the moment they were born. And I don't know why or how it's become put into that sort of specialist hobby bucket. when actually it should be part of our everyday life. And just knowing when the chiff chaff arrives in March is a very special moment, you know, and it reaches the soul when you hear the chiff chaff sing. So it's all, I wanted to make the book, make nature relatable in a human way, but also show the healing power. I suppose that would be my aims.
Absolutely. And I think, as someone who has listened to the book, I think that the book does it that fantastically, which is why, likewise, it's a real honor to have you here to chat to us today, because I think the aims have certainly been achieved. I think it's a lovely book. So Lisa's saying you should also speak at the Good Grief Festival, Charlie. Your perspective is very helpful. That could be one for your list. Yeah. So if anyone does have any questions for Charlie, please do start putting them in the chat, and we will try and pick up as much of it as possible and I'll try and put as many questions as I can to him. We might not be able to do all of them, but the way, you know, I was saying to Charlie before we started this call, I'm happy to just talk to him with all my questions for the next half hour or probably forever. But this really, the idea of these sessions is that they are Q&As run by you, that is the audience. So if you have any questions for Charlie about birds or books or mental health or grief or anything, please do pop them in the chat. So we'll be keeping an eye on that as we go. But I'm going to start things off, I think, with a question while people are thinking about what they might like to ask you. I want to know, so if anyone who reads the book knows that you have this love for birds, and you do, I think, know quite a lot about birds. However, I would imagine that there was also a great deal of research that went into writing 12 Birds to Save Your Life. So I was kind of interested to know what that process was like for you. You know, how did you research the book? Was it quite extensive?
Well, it's yes and no. The way I suppose by the time I came to write it, it sort of poured out, and it had been in my head for quite some years to write this book, but it was just finding the time. My research was really, I mean, the greatest joy was starting out the reconnection process or learning again. But I mean, it would have, it was a process of osmosis, I suppose, over a decade or so. So you start, it's a layering effect, you know, when you start and you get to know the bird song in your garden, for example, and then, you know, once you've learned a few, you start, you know the robin and the blackbird, you start to realize, you know, saying, you know what things aren't. So it's not a robin, it's not a blackbird. Well, I'll look that up, I'll find that out. And then just going out on those spring mornings, and every time I heard something or saw something new, you know, and it's all about context. That's the other thing about the book. I wanted to give people context. So if you are in an open field, you're going to see yellowhammers and skylarks and a hare, you know, and that's what you'll see in open farmland. But in your garden, you'll see a robin and blue tits, and you know, and context was so important as part of that for me as well. As I learned more and more about the birds, and then I reached a kind of rather like a chalk stream that, you know, the aquifers fill up to a certain point and then the water starts pouring out. So I reached this point where I say, right, I have to get this down on paper because I want to share it. You know, I want to share the joy that this brings me and the help that it's given me in sort of healing all the different.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic reason, because this is the other thing that I was wondering, and I think you have answered this question now more or less, that, you know, you talk about a lot of very personal themes in this book, and sometimes you have to wonder why an author would share very personal things with everyone, or whether they would want to keep it for themselves. But I think, yeah, the sharing of this knowledge that you've accumulated is so important, and I think it has helped lots of other people as well, which is, do you feel like it was the right thing for you to have done to write this book then?
So it's a really good question, because I loved sharing the joy of the bird song and the birds and helping people, because it's written, as I say, in this relatable way, and I'm not nerdy or scientific, you know. I like to, you know, it's really written for the person on the commuter train, you know, who's completely lost touch, as well as everyone else, you know, those who already love birds. But it's you know, the hardest thing was the personal stuff, because as I say in the book, you know, I come from a background where you don't talk about that sort of thing. So it was I used to lock myself in a room and sort of lock the world outside and say, I'm just going to write now, rather than, you know, worry about, you know, how I would come across, and ultimately, while that was the hardest thing to write about grief, and then digging up a lot of stuff about the past and sharing it, I had a great editor who was slightly holding my hand. She kept saying I was hiding behind metaphors, so which is a very good comment, which I never forgot. But of course, the proof is in the pudding, and all the all the letters and the feedback and everything else that I've got back from it, how it's helped people has justified it to me. But there were certainly points at which I thought, should I be doing this? You have this guilt about sharing this stuff. It's weird. And that's part of the whole book, I suppose, and the process.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's understandable. Sometimes it's a very nuanced thing, and sometimes you can't 100% say for sure I'm dead certain that this is the right thing to do, or I completely think it's wrong, and you sometimes have to go for it a little bit. I'm just looking at the chat. We've got a few lovely questions in and a few more comments. We have Linda saying that they love watching the birds in their garden, including 2 visiting ducks. A pond attracts a lot of birds. That's lovely. That's really nice to hear.
Always good for birds. Yeah,
it is. That's right. And we have a lovely question from Lisa, who says, my question is simple. What do birds do for you personally, and why do you like them? It's a good one.
Well, there you go. That's a good one. So the first thing I'd say is, birds aren't going to cure cancer. They're not going to suddenly transform your life. But what they do is that they're a constant reminder in your life of anything from the changing of the seasons to I just mentioned the chiffchaff. Well, the chiffchaff has started singing in my garden now. The chiffchaff, it weighs less than an ounce, and it's flown all the way 4,000 miles across deserts and oceans to be singing in this oak tree in the lane down there. And I find that is a miracle. And it's the same with the swifts or the swallows. And I just think, that is such a mind-blowing miracle that's in our life now. People think, I've got to go to Costa Rica or Africa to see great wildlife, but actually these little miracles happen every day, and they inspire me every day. And that first blackbird in late February that you'll hear, Emily, you were talking about blackbirds earlier on, it's like it's a melting melody that gets into your soul, and that's genetic, and that goes back to, pre-Neolithic times. These birds are sending you messages saying, spring is coming, the season is on the turn, it's going to stop being bloody cold and raining every day quite soon. Or the greenfinches chirring, and it's just knowing they're all there. Or when I'm feeling particularly, if I don't get out into the hills, and also this, happens all over, Hyde Park, I used to go and listen to the, song thrushes. So when I lived in London, so it's towns as well as countryside. But getting out, being among them, and realizing that you're, we're actually of this planet rather than just in it and walking about, is such a wonderful realization. And if I don't get out and about, if I spend a few days without doing that, I am a physically and mentally sadder human being. Would be the quite a long answer to that. Anyway, I hope it answers. I love the birds.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about even when you were living in London, you would listen, you were able to connect with local bird life, because Victoria actually asks, what advice would you give to someone living in a city who wants to connect with local bird life? So do you have any tips? Because I think sometimes people think it's possibly a bit harder than it is. I think it's just a different environment. There are definitely still birds. Would you agree?
No. Tip number one is, we see, but we don't watch, and we hear, but we don't listen. And tip number one is to notice, is to tune in. And the moment that you start tuning in, you will start noticing. For example, cities these days are full of goldfinches, which are, and the collective noun for goldfinch is a charm of goldfinches. And they are, that you can, describe it better. Like, these collective names are wonderful. But then you'll just suddenly start noticing them. And you'll always notice a robin, because the robin will always find you. And then you'll hear the blackbirds, and then you'll start noticing once you tune into it, and you go to getting up early in the morning helps. So get into the park early in the morning, and the birds will be, especially this time of year, you will really start to notice the bird song. So people say, and sparrows, well, we've lost a lot of our sparrows in towns, but there's sort of some places coming back a bit. But, they're everywhere. But the problem is we have always treated it, our own wildlife in this country particularly, like this old faded wallpaper that we long ago stopped noticing. So tuning in is the number one piece of advice that I would have.
I think that's really helpful, because I think also that in a way that sort of applies to people who don't live in urban areas as well, but who aren't necessarily familiar with being able to recognize and spot the local bird life. You just actively trying to tune in. I think something that I talk about with my friends a lot is if we're going for a walk, you know, even if we're just walking from the bus stop to the train station, not having earphones in that at that point.
100%. Yeah.
You
I
know?
never wear earphones. And when I walk, you know, what we do, we tend to walk from A to B with our earphones in, and we stare down and we're looking at our blasted phone. You know, to put the phone away, take the earphones out and just walk and look. I mean, my wife, you know, for a while found it very difficult to walk with me because I stop all the time. You know, I'm always stopping and wandering and going off in another direction and saying, oh, what's that over there? I'm still fascinated. What's amazing about nature is that, well, you know, I grew up on a farm and I've been, you know, dislocated myself and relocated myself in my own environment. I never get bored. There's a new excitement for me. Nature, I've never walked out. I mean, I must have walked down the lane near my house 1,000 times. Every day there's something new for me to see or get excited. It's this time of year, you know, waiting for the reed warblers to arrive in the canal. The chiffchaffs come. And hopefully we'll hear a cuckoo soon enough. And it's just everything is changing all the time. And in the winter, you've got all the migratory birds coming from the north. You know, the fieldfares have just left, and the redwings. We had so many this year. Yeah, it's all going on, and we ignore it.
Yes, I think so. I think, yeah, not if you are sort of just doing an A to B sort of walk, not wearing earphones, I would say is a good tip. Although I will double back on myself and say I recently I've been trying to actively listen to birdsong more, but when I've been on the train, I was listening to 12 Birds to Save Your Life, and I did have my earphones in at that point, but it was all for the right cause, I think.
Yes, definitely.
yeah, we'll allow that. We have a couple of lovely comments about people's personal experiences with birds. So Lisa says, my dad was friends with a robin. It used to wait for him coming back from the shops, then hop up the path and garden fence with him. My dad would then feed him. That's lovely, Lisa. Andrea, sorry, I don't know if I've pronounced that right, says dawn chorus is the most amazing start to a new day. I totally agree. It's really, really beautiful. Julie says the swallows return to our sheds every year after their epic journey. We love watching them dipping and diving for bugs on summer evenings. Really, really beautiful. If you do live near water, they often will skim the surface.
Oh, it's amazing. The house martins doing that. Absolutely amazing.
Yes, absolutely fantastic sight. And I did, Linda said, this made me laugh. The best thing about birds is that they don't talk back, which is...
Yes, I know, absolutely. Nature's great, doesn't answer back. It just carries on as though you're not there. It's wonderful.
Yes. We have an interesting question from Paula, who asks whether there's anything biologically innate in humans that makes birdsong healing, do you think? Is there something biologically within us?
It has to be, because it's all these are sending signals and messages to us. So is my son. It's nature sending messages, because we do think that we're somehow these aliens that have been placed on this on this sort of alien planet. You know, they are part of what we are, and so when something goes back so far, there is no doubt at all that there is something innate within us about hearing birdsong. Because particularly, I think in the spring, after long, you know, winters are easy for us. You imagine what winter was like, you know, 1,000 years ago, or even 150 years ago, and hearing those birds singing in the spring is such a powerful message about life getting better. And it teaches us in all life that things, you know, things do change, things get better, and life is up and down and round and about.
Absolutely. I think, that's a really fantastic response. We touched on this before, but Linda does ask, do you have a favorite bird? And Linda says, mine is a wren.
I love wrens. The amazing about wren, I just want to talk about wrens. Where one of my chapters on wrens, but when in winter, wrens are very fiercely competitive in summer. And I'm sure you know this because your favorite bird is a wren. But in winter, they sort of, you know, drop their weapons and come together, but, you know, especially in cold winters, and sometimes you'll get sort of 10, 15 wrens all squeezed together in a tiny spot. And I think the record is that they found something like 69 wrens in a post box in something like that in the 1960s, all in a tiny little space. And and for such a tiny bird to have such a big voice, you know, I always think they're the Dolly Parton of of the bird world. You know, this tiny and this enormous voice, you can hear it, you know, in 2 counties. So I do love wrens, and they kind of sing all through the winter as well, which is heartening. My favorite bird is always a difficult one because it changes with the seasons. It changes all the time. But really, I generally come back to song thrushes because they sing in the darkest hour. You know, they start singing in the middle of January, almost, you know, life, you think, is, you know, those dark nights, Christmas is over, you know, you've taken all your presents back, you've run out of money, you know, it's a long month, January. And then you hear those song thrushes, you know, sing, you know, in the darkness at sort of 5 or 6 in the morning, when, you know, instinctively you actually, half of you wants to chuck a brick at it, you know, because you've got to sleep. But actually hearing that beautiful, powerful, thrusting song, you know, repeating its note, and, you know, just wallowing in that is such a lovely feeling, and it's telling you that spring is coming. And obviously the skylark as well. I mean, I have skylarks. I'm lucky enough we live in a rural area in Wiltshire. I can hear the skylarks from the end of my garden, and so every day I can get
wonderful.
Like a drug. It's like an injection of neat hope to the soul hearing a skylark sing.
I think that's a very good answer. I think any bird would have been a good answer if you have that personal relationship with them, you know. And that's, I think, something that I wanted to ask you. So we did touch earlier on the fact that your book is both informative and very personal. So I think from 12 Birds to Save Your Life, there is this message that comes out about, again and again, about the importance of actually not just being able to identify birds or recognize their bird song, which is great, but it's having that personal relationship with them, feeling like we had someone saying, oh, my dad was friends with a robin, or, you know, we have swallows that come back every single year. There's something very important about that. And why, I was wondering what your take on that is. Why do you think it's so important to have personal relationships with nature?
Because I think if you don't, you know, I'll come back to the same point. If you don't, you know, what are we as a species? You know, we are nature. It's not even a question. The premise of the question, I mean, you know, we've almost deliberately taken nature out of our lives, you know, as a species, you know. And this is only in the last 150 years. You know, take farming. You know, my grandfather was born in 1905. Now, he knew where every bird's nest on the farm was. He knew exactly when the swallows arrived. He knew that a woodcock had nested in a wood in 1938. You know, he knew this stuff. He just knew it. And now, as the farmers' generation got older, you know, back then you had, you know, back in the early 1900s, you were attached to the back of a horse plowing, or you were on a very small tractor through most of the trip. So you could avoid the ground nesting birds that you were, and you saw the nature. Farmers now, and I said half of my family are farmers. You know, you sit in a cab listening to Radio 1, or even some of these combines have televisions in them, and they're all pre-programmed.
Wow.
You are literally further away from your environment, and we're all like that. We've enclosed ourselves in neat, with our neat gardens and our neat. I know it's good to save energy, but you know, birds like nooks and crannies. Birds love living with us. They want to be with us. Housemoths want to nest in our house. Sparrows want to nest in nooks and crannies, but we've heat sealed our houses so that there's no room for birds. And we've made our lawns so neat. Why do we love? Nature loves a mess, but we love as humans every little bit of grass cut. And so we're you know, denying them nesting and places to nest, things to eat. It's all running out. So it's not just farmers, it's all of us. It's the way we live now has evicted them. But birds, it's amazing how quickly they recover and how quickly they all want to come back and be with us, because they are a part of what our life is.
So it's so important to have a relationship, a personal relationship with nature, not from a conservation kind of sort of perspective, but also I think. Absolutely. And I think your book also, another facet of your book is that it's important to have a relationship with nature as well, from a mental health perspective, certainly. You know, you talk about how getting to know certain species of bird and paying attention to them and learning from them has supported you through loneliness and grief and anxiety. And is that something that you really wanted to share particularly with other people by writing this book, that, you know, because I think so many of us now are so anxious, we're so stressed, everyone experiences grief, everybody feels quite lonely. I think with the rise of technology, actually we can become more isolated sometimes, and obviously with the pandemic, lots of people are still shielding. It can be quite lonely to live today. Is that something that you sort of wanted to share, this message that nature can help with that?
Yeah, you're never alone in nature. You know, I mean, it's technology, I think, makes us, you know, there's great irony, I think, at the heart of the communications revolution that we're living through, is that the more ways we find to communicate with one another, the worse we become at communicating with one another. With technology, you know, I definitely suffered from anxiety, particularly, you know, around the death of my mother and what happened with us there, because it was like a nuclear explosion in our family. It all happened very quickly, and you know, trying to put the pieces back together, you know, takes time. And the one thing I really learned was my long walks, was realizing that it's not just a lonely walk. You know, if you sit and you watch and nature comes to you, you suddenly realize that you're not the main actor in this great you know, melodrama of life, or just a bit part in nature's great epic. You know, it's quite reassuring to feel tiny, you know, to lie on a hill staring up at the stars and realize how small and insignificant you are. It's incredibly reassuring. Nature doesn't care about your problems. It's just going to carry on. It's got its own problems. And you know, that just it's the perspective that it gives you, and that you lose if you don't look around you and stop and listen. And yeah, there's definitely, the Buddhists have got a point, haven't they? I mean, you know, it's a meditative act, and I get distracted by it. Well, I can get massively down. I've got 2 young children, got all the, you know, all the problems that hit everybody, you know, and never having any time, and trying to juggle work and kids. My wife's the same. And if I get out on that hill, even for 20 minutes, get out on a walk, I am totally distracted. I'm not just walking and thinking, because we've got these brains that rev, you know, they get 5,000 revs per minute, where we're over-evolved. And we're just always thinking, constantly bombarded and besieged by worries and thoughts. If you can reconnect with the wildlife around you, it distracts you totally, just watching it. Once you've tuned in and you see it and you start to learn, and it's amazing how the ear so quickly begins to tell the difference between, you know, the timbre of different bird songs, and when things arrive, it's amazing. Your body changes in all kinds of way.
And I think, I don't believe I'm making this up, I think there is a section in your book where you sort of detail how, you know, you're talking now about how it's a meditative act to sit in nature and just focus on that and be distracted by your own from your own thoughts, but it can take time to actually learn. It's a skill that can be learned, because sometimes I think people think, okay, great, nature's gonna, you know, that's gonna really help, and you sort of sit there and you're like, why isn't it working? I'm so stressed out still. But you have to really train yourself, don't you? And that's something you found as well.
You have to train yourself, and you have to work at it, and you have to get interested and get to love it, because you're absolutely right. People say, yeah, go for a walk, and you sit there and it's worse. You know, your brain's just bombarded. They did this experiment where they took 20 people. They said to 10 people, right, go into a room and think about all the good things in your life, you know, why your life's so good. And they said to the other 10 people, go into a room and just think about clouds. So 20 minutes later, they came back, and the room full of people who were told to think about all the good things in their life were depressed. And the people who were told to think about clouds were just happy, fine. Because, of course, the moment you say, you know, think on the positive side, your brain will automatically cancel that out by something negative. So, but if you just think about clouds, you just think about clouds. You know, but it's training your mind to be able to do that. Yeah. But it's even easier with nature, because if you know, I know that I'll go for a walk later, I hope, if I've got some time later today. And I'm going to be in search of skylarks, or I'm going to be in search of, see if the kestrel's out, or are there any hares around this evening, or something. You know, there's something, and there's still a little buzz and a distraction, and you are distracted. And as I say, it's not going to cure cancer. It's not going to make you, you know, it's not going to totally transform your personality. What it will do is put your life into perspective, and it will help you to cope, and it will bring you back sometimes from some very dark places, like it did with me.
Very, very wise words. I think mental health is something we do talk about quite a lot here in kind of the Listening Books community, because obviously our service is in part for people whose mental health or mental illness can impact on being able to read, maybe because you're distracted or you have intrusive thoughts or you have panic attacks. And sometimes I have to remind myself as well that audiobooks can be such a lifesaver, but also it's one of the many tools in your tool belt. And sometimes you have to train yourself to actually, in a similar way, you sort of have to train yourself to tune into a book. Sometimes if you're feeling very overwhelmed, you might sort of listen to 2 minutes and go, oh, it's not working, but actually just to give yourself some time and practice.
It's time and it's practice, and it's the same. I mean, all these are techniques in music as well, you know. But it's exactly. I mean, books, you know, not just books about nature, but books are a massively important part of my way of coping with the tricky business of being a human. And it's also another thing we've neglected as a species. So we don't have time just to sit and read a book or to listen to a book. You know, I mean, we're too busy, but then this is how we get too stressed. I mean, we're not, as a species, this is designed for this life, really, I think. It's only happened in the last 50 years. And with the new technologies, you said, you know, these phones are constantly summoning us. So give me more. They're like, these phones are like difficult children. I want more, you know. It's like beeping all day.
And like you say, reading can be really hard to fit in. And I really enjoyed your sort of references to the sort of books that you've enjoyed kind of either as a child or an adult in 12 Birds to Save Your Life. And I think a lot of the books that you mentioned kind of other kinds of birds. So you have 12 main chapters in 12 Birds to Save Your Life. Each one is one of the 12 birds. But you do sort of mention that you've read a lot about lots of other different kinds of birds. And even talking to you now, I can see that it's not just these 12 birds that you are interested in. You are a big fan of bird life. And it actually leads us to a question from Catherine, who asked us, or asked you, were there any other birds that you were considering featuring in your book that didn't make the cut in the end?
Well, that's a very good question. So pretty much most of them made the cut, because the way that I looked at it is that each bird in each chapter is kind of a gateway bird, you know. So if I'm writing about the robin, which is in the book, I will talk about all the garden birds. So I will talk, and you know, if I talk about you know, the skylark, I talk about all the birds that you'll see in an open field. So I can get my yellowhammer in, you know, or I can get my lapwing in, because they're birds of the open field, and so. I could talk about all that. I talk about barn owls. I talk about all owls, you know, and chaffinches. You know, I get into that. You know, so there are 85 birds actually, I think, in total in the book. So it's sort of 80 birds to save your life, but that doesn't have the same sort of ring to it. But the 12 birds are all ones that did have a special meaning to me in some way during this 12-month period where my mum, well, she got ill and died in a 6-month period, and then the aftermath, and so it took me through a whole season. And so I was able to take the reader through a whole season of what you'll see and hear. So that's that's absolutely great. I'm trying to work out what my, hang on a minute. I think I'm unplugged. Hold on. Wait 1 second.
Okay. No worries. In the meantime, I'm just going to have a look and see what other comments I may have been neglecting. Lovely. We have a couple more lovely comments from Lisa, actually, who's mentioned that, for example, another fantastic little bird fact that she wants to talk about is that a Harris hawk's eyesight is so good it could read a newspaper a mile away, which I really love that you mentioned, Lisa, because I love the idea of a Harris hawk being able to read a newspaper, like even if it were right in front of it.
The Financial Times.
Yeah.
Or like I mean, when I do barn owls, which I didn't know before I wrote the book, you know, they're not, they make absolutely no noise at all, not even a whoosh. They're totally silent, but they're not waterproof. So if it rains, they can't fly. So they can't hunt at night when it rains at night. So if we have a lot of rain, feel sorry for the barn owls, you know. But it's all these, you know, they're miraculous creatures.
And it's learning. I think the more you start to, it's all a bit of a knock-on effect. If you start to listen to bird song, you might start to learn more different facts about birds, which might lead you on to learning about other birds that maybe don't live in your area, and it might help your mental health. And you do start to sort of build a rapport with these birds and see them more as kind of like neighbors with personalities rather than just like an illustration in a book. Which is something that you do touch on as well in 12 Birds, because I think you talk about how people used to write about birds in ye olden days, where they would, you know, the depictions of birds are so full of life and so whimsical, really, and really do give them their own personalities, because they do have them. So it's really wonderful to connect with that.
There was always vicars and parsons writing about them. Yes. But the way they talk them in such sort of human terms, but also they're not sentimental. I'm not talking about being sentimental. I don't think that's what they are. But I think that they feel as part of their life. You know, these birds are really integral to them with the way that they write. Whereas now we do this sort of superciliums and kind of the male will do this and that. You know, it's all kind of so scientific, and you suck the heart out when as soon as you get any scientific about it, it suddenly dehumanizes it all. And so that's why, I definitely like the old way of writing about them. And
yes,
and all that sort of thing.
But I think you've brought that back in your book. You know, that's the sort of style that you write in. And I think people were saying in the comments today, you know, it's so wonderful to hear a writer talk so passionately and so articulately about bird life, because that's the way it should be discussed, you know, not in this dry sort of overly matter-of-fact way. Yes, no, it's been a really, really wonderful conversation, actually. I'm looking at the time, and I know that we need to sort of wrap up soon, but I think there's one more question that I definitely want to put to you, and it's a good one to end on. So Andrea asks, are you planning on writing any more books about nature? Do you have any up your sleeve?
Oh, no, that is a good question. I do. It's finding the time at the moment, juggling work, children, all those sort of things. But I kind of wanted to, while I was writing 12 Birds, I found out that the oak tree supports something like more species than any other tree. Something like 2,300 species are supported by a single tree. And that fascinated me. It never left my mind. And I then went to speak to a load of oak experts on oak, which are remarkably few people are experts in oak. And this very nice lady said, well, no, actually, it's 2,301. I said, who's the one? She said, us. And we asked, because a lot of the thing about the 12 Birds Save Your Life was embedding birds in our culture again, because they play such a big part in our culture. And the oak is such a big part of our culture. And I thought it would be another useful way to help, again, in a relatable way, people get to know trees a bit more. And you know, then relate it to my own life. And there's an oak tree in a garden in the farm where I grew up, which is on its last leg. It must be 400 or 500 years old, you know, so it's relating it just back to life. And so that's sort of up there and out there. So there may be something coming up quite soon, but let's get around to it.
Yes, perhaps 12 trees to save your life could be hitting our shelves. That would be very interesting. Yeah, I think obviously there are so many elements of our kind of local nature that we need to be paying more attention to. So if you can write as passionately about any other kind of nature as you have done about birds, I'd be one to read it myself. It's a fantastic book, and if I haven't recommended it to you enough, I'm looking down the camera now. You listen to it, read it.
Thank you.
It's fantastic, and thank you again for chatting to us. We have some closing comments for people from people who've been here. So we have two Lisas. So one Lisa says you could join the Cloud Appreciation Society. It's wonderful. I don't know whether that's like a national organization or whether it might be like an online group, but that does sound fantastic. And another Lisa says, which I think this is a really wonderful comment. Lisa says, I have a pair of wood pigeons very close to the house, and I even call them mum and dad. I think they're keeping an eye on me on behalf of my late parents, which is wonderful. And that really sums up kind of everything we've been talking about, really, how if you have this connection with nature, it can really help you cope with loss. It can make you feel, you know, connected to the world. It can help to quell anxiety. It can be really wonderful. So thank you so much. We have some people saying, "Oh, I'm definitely reading this."
Oh, well,
book
that's
now."
good. Yeah,
We've done our jobs.
nice.
But yes. So before we wrap up, I just wanted to say thank you so much to Virtual Village Hall, run by Royal Voluntary Service, for facilitating this whole meeting. So we wouldn't have necessarily been able to do this by ourselves, and they are fantastic, and they run lots of online events. So if you're looking for other things that, you know, new groups to join or other hobbies to pick up, definitely check out what else they have going on. Thank you very much to everyone who's been in the chat, listening, commenting, sharing their stories with us, as well as asking questions. It's been really lovely to hear from you all. So thank you so much for coming. And Charlie, of course, thank you to yourself. You've been wonderful to chat to, and we really, really appreciate you giving your time to talk to us today. And I hope you've enjoyed it as well.
I've had a lovely time. Thank you very much for your lovely questions, for everyone's lovely questions. And no, it's been a real honour to be on Listening Books today. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, guys. And as a reminder, Listening Books is a charitable audiobook lending service. You can look us up at listening-books.org.uk. If you have an illness or disability that makes it harder to read print, please check us out, because we might be able to support you. And I think that's it pretty much. I've said my goodbyes, so I hope everyone has a fantastic day. Keep listening to the birds. It's the best time of year to just get out and listen to them if you can, and spot them if you're able. And everybody, take care. Have a lovely day.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.